Before getting into Mark's presentation, I have the pleasant duty of doing three things. Brief intro about Spin Chennai to those who are new. Second, set the context for the session. And third, introduce Mark. So with that, I'll start about Spin. Spin is a little short of 25 years old as a knowledge ecosystem. Spin Chennai is affiliated to Carnegie Mellon University Software Engineering Institute, as well as ISACA, the global body. Our vision is to build a world-class knowledge ecosystem, which is very compelling, highly relevant, and value-adding to the people in industry, distinctively futuristic, and passionately co-creative. That is the model, our vision in building Spin ecosystem. We have a 3,000 member knowledge ecosystem comprising of CXOs, senior leaders, SVPs, VPs, HR, marketing and sales professionals, quality and delivery professionals, banking, financial services, insurance professionals, telecom, automotive, manufacturing, senior consultants, chartered accountants, mentors, academia, leading professors like Dr. Gopal and various other institutions are part of the member network. We have individual members as well as corporate members available with us. Some of the international gurus who have been associated with Spin Chennai include Dr. Watts Humphrey. Watts Humphrey has been associated with us for nearly 10 years, in whose honor we have instituted the Watts Humphrey Award, which happens every year with huge participation from the industry to bring out the best case studies from the industry. We have had Louis Trigger from Israel, who is a theory of constraints expert, who directly was tutored by the world famous Eliyahu Goldratt. So Louis Trigger had come to Chennai and conducted a one-day workshop to Spin Chennai folks. We had Dr. Bill Curtis from US, who has contributed significantly to the development of the world famous CMI model, people CMI model from Carnegie Mellon. We had him as the chief guest for the 2018 Watts Humphrey Awards. So that is a brief about Spin. I can go on for another 10 to 15 minutes about Spin, but considering that this is, we are all here to listen to Mark, I don't want to take much of time on these. Coming to today's session and the status of the business world struck by COVID-19, if you look at S&P 500, Fortune 500 or Global 2000 organizations, they're all facing obsolescence. They're getting disrupted by digital leaders, digital business models, etc. So that their average life expectancy in the index has come down from 60 years. If you look at 1960 to 80, it was around 60 years they were in the part of the index. Now it is only 12 years, right? While disruption is not new, the speed, complexity, and the global nature of it is very new and very challenging. That's the pace of change happening in the industry today. Established organizations as well as fledglings are all struggling to cope up with the change, let alone lead the future in this COVID-19 world. However, visionary industrial age titans like Thomas Edison, Henry Ford, Toyota, and in our own day, Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, they all recognize the transformative power of new technologies and leverage them to build vast enterprises that change the whole economies and ways of life. Each of these leaders looked past the conventional wisdom of the day, foresaw a different and better world, and mobilized others to join them in their quest to create it. Where did their vision come from? By what alchemy, besides sheer force of intellect, personality, and determination, did they bring them to life? Can such vision be seen only in entrepreneurs who build their companies from scratch and scale them to large corporations? Can these be embedded into middle and senior executives who are leading the enterprises today? I myself have led the innovation culture practice at Infosys starting 2009, where we were trying to look at the major trends in horizon and see how they will impact our customers' business, our business, etc. over the next 5 to 7 years. However, in an established company which is doing well, where the obsession is on existing quarter, next quarter, if you come up with an idea which is beyond the realm of existing business, with results accruing over the longer term, the acceptability and investment becomes a challenge. The ideas which enhance existing business and bring sustenance tend to get the most attention. As a result, present forward policy prevents any breakthrough ideas to be taken forward and invested on it. What this means is only incremental ideas see the light of the day and they are celebrated and rewarded, leading to sustaining organizational mediocrity. In order to navigate this world of disruptive change, what we need is to invest more time and effort into the future. We have to really look at who are the customers of the future. What do they want? What skills do they need? Do we need in the future? Who will be our competitors in the future? What we need are ideas that are non-linear and iterative, which can help fold back the future. How do we bring in dual transformation? Transformation of today's business as well as innovate with tomorrow's business. When the pull of the present prevents us from really engaging with the future, how can we achieve breakthrough growth? I have the pleasure of inviting Mark Johnson, the international guru, to share the tips to future back strategies and implementations. Please keep updating your questions in the chat facility available, and please be on mute, both audio and video, till you are called out. At the end of his talk, I will be relaying some of the relevant questions to Mark for his response. In case we do not have time to get all your questions answered in this session, Mark has agreed to respond with his answers later, which we will relate back to you. Coming to Mark's profile, Mark Johnson co-founded the strategy and innovation management consultancy InnoSight with the Harvard Business School professor Clayton Christensen in 2000, which was acquired by the Huron Consulting Group in 2017. Mark advises CEOs and other leaders on how to envision the future, create new growth, and manage transformation. The author of Reinvent Your Business Model, How to Seize the White Space for Transformative Growth, 2018, and a co-author of Dual Transformation, How to Reposition Today's Business While Creating the Future. Mark has written and co-written numerous articles for a wide range of publications, including the McKinsey award-winning Reinventing Your Business Model for Harvard Business Review. Prior to InnoSight, Mark was a nuclear-powered trained surface warfare officer in the US Navy. He received his MBA from Harvard Business School, a master's degree in civil engineering and engineering mechanics from Columbia University, and a bachelor's degree with distinction in aerospace engineering from the US Naval Academy. Mark and his wife, Jane Clayson Johnson, are the parents of 5 children and the grandparents of 3. I am delighted to really welcome Mark, and over to you, Mark, for your presentation. Thank you once again for accepting.
Thank you, Rajaram. Thanks everybody for joining. I really appreciate to be here. I would love to just start off by saying that the culmination of Lead from the Future, How to Turn Visionary Thinking into Breakthrough Growth, it's a culmination of 20 years of the work with InnoSight, the strategy and innovation firm I co-founded, as Rajaram said, with Clayton Christensen of the Harvard Business School. And what led us to this work was we started off thinking about disruptive innovation, obviously with Clay's work on the innovator's dilemma and disruptive technologies and all of that. And we found that, we needed to expand our thinking on innovation, that the disruption was really in the business model. So we spent a lot of time thinking about not just product and service innovation, but business model innovation. We tried to help companies not just think about the threat of disruption, but really the opportunity to create new market growth, to develop, if you will, non-consumption. But we found that a lot of companies stumbled in their ability to stay the course with these investments or to invest soon enough. And so we worked to realize that we needed not only innovation teams, but senior leadership teams to get behind these efforts with a longer term vision and strategy by which new breakthrough growth efforts would fit within the overall strategy of what they were trying to do. So there was more purpose driven behind them. And that led us further to think about leadership team interaction, and are they learning in the right way? Because as we try to peer into the future and to develop breakthrough growth, there's a much higher set of assumptions and less knowledge about it. And so the operative word is to be in a learning mode, and to be, as a values, humble and have humility in the way to learn. And I think too often top team executives end up too much in operate and execute, worried about getting data and information and making decisions. And certainly that's the main part of what they have to do. They have to continue to sustain the core operations. And without a successful core organization, you're not going to get the opportunity to try to venture off beyond that. And that certainly is a bulk of the time, but some time needs to be carved out for more of what we would call exploration and envisioning. Again, not just with the leadership team, not just with the innovation team, but the leadership team as well, and that they're almost working in partnership to develop more systematically the ability to drive near-term, short-term types of opportunities, but the longer-term opportunities as well. That just goes beyond, traditional research and development. So with that as a backdrop, let me share my screen and share just start with a story, because I think, kind of in the spirit of Harvard Business School and case studies, I think it might be helpful to to start with that. And so, I'm going to share a story that I think at first glance everybody will say they know a lot about, which is the story of Apple and Steve Jobs. What I don't think is familiar, because I think many would say, well, it was just an incredible marketing genius. This was an outsized personality that just made sort of the reality distortion field, which is in, I think, a lot of the literature about what he's done. But really what he did was, I think, what we talk about in the book. He was future back minded. He was a practical visionary. And interestingly, related to the COVID-19 crisis, he came back to Apple in the late 90s and soon thereafter faced two crises. One was the crises of just general challenge of the personal computer being commoditized, and especially as being a niche, high-end personal computer manufacturer as Apple. The second challenge he faced was the dot-com bubble and crash of 2000, 2001. So this was in the midst of a crisis of twofold. And yet what Steve Jobs did in 2000 and 2001 is he gathered his top 100 people, his top 100 lieutenants, and they looked out to 2010, 10 years out, and they began to talk about what could Apple be? What should it be? How could it get beyond this trend of commoditization and some of the challenges it was facing? And they looked out and they came up with this idea of a digital hub vision or strategy, where it was really an adjacent move from their core business. They looked out and said, why can't the personal computer, we have all of these consumer electronic devices coming out, digital cameras and camcorders and personal devices, and even MP3 player technology was coming out during this time for audio. And they looked out 10 years and said, why can't we enable, with our microprocessing and our computing power, be the enablement of each of these devices? And if we write software that can interface with them, we can put all of the power into these devices, but yet not have to have these devices get bogged down by their own microprocessor or their own sort of hardware that needs to be in there. So this is the vision that he came out with his lieutenants, that again was an adjacent move to be able to get beyond the core computer by looking out 10 years and being able to imagine what could ultimately this look like for Apple. What's interesting is he not only thought that, and he pronounced that to the world, what he didn't share with the world was that Apple could actually produce its own consumer electronic devices, and that they began to develop this with their imagination, how they could produce Apple as its own company. As we know, started with the iPod, then the iPad, and the iPhone, and then the iPad. And this became what you'd say was their white space. for really going fully beyond the core. And many of these devices were actually not just product innovations, but business model innovations. The iPod with the iTunes store and integration with software and a different revenue model became a fundamental business model innovation. And just like the iPhone, with sort of being platform based, with the ability for applications to be written on top of it, it really changed the way telephony was working to be really much more than that. And fundamental was a business model change. But all of that breakthrough growth sat underneath a vision of looking out 10 years, putting Apple in that vision in the sense of what does our literal business opportunities, at least at the high level, look like? What is our enterprise view? So it's more than just a simple vision statement. It was a portfolio of core, adjacent, and new opportunities that were then walked back to the present of 2000, 2001, where they started working first on software of all kinds. Then they developed the iPhone, the iPod. 2 years later, the iTunes store. And then really the rest is history, with later in 2007, the iPhone and so forth. So there's no more powerful example of showing that, yes, Steve Jobs was a visionary, but he was a practical visionary. And there was procedurally a way to capture in what he did. And with his team, he just didn't do it alone, by being able to look out into the future and then walk that back to the present, to real tangible initiatives that are in purpose with achieving that intended future. So that's just the story that kind of helped give you the basic idea. As I mentioned, really Lead from the Future is a culmination of more than 20 years of our thinking of integrating innovation with strategy and envisioning with leadership. And we really feel those disciplines have to come together if companies are going to be able to be more forward-looking, more ability to own their future, especially in a world where they have to navigate disruptive change. Most companies are facing, with knowledge transfer and just technology evolution, that things don't stay as stable as they used to be for as long as they are. And so the ability to not only sustain performance, but also change for the purposes of reinvention and developing the new and different, I think we have to have a new way to think about management, which is this idea that we are able to embrace the long term and bring it alive and make it practical, while also managing the short term and continuing to drive that growth. The essence of Lead from the Future is simple. It's really to sustain growth, to be sustainable, not just profitable. We need to plan not just for the long term, but also not just for the short term, but also for the long term. And that's done by bringing the future alive. It's not just enough to say, oh, well, we'll talk about the future and think about it and then make some decisions. We have to overcome, as was earlier said, all of the challenges of short-term thinking and rewards and incentives and all the things that put us to make that difficult. So we need to develop a more powerful vision than just a one sentence or two sentence statement that's part of a mission and vision exercise. We actually have to build a narrative of the future, of this future enterprise, like Steve Jobs did with his colleagues at Apple with the digital hub vision and strategy, and make a vision that is actionable, that is tangible, and that then can be translated back to something today. And then finally, the way to do that is through a way of thinking and a process we call future back, to make sure that that vision is properly developed and not too much anchored on expectations the way things are today. And I apologize. I think somebody needs to go on mute. I hear quite a bit of noise in the background. So let me start with just establishing the language first of this.
Please. Sorry, go ahead.
No problem. The first part of this is just to reiterate that what we have found is the failure of companies to develop transformative innovations has fallen into four buckets. Either it's too late in the investment of that effort. There's too few resources that are allocated to the effort. There's an impatience for growth, either in the sense that things start to become successful and the organization wants to move it along really fast to the point that it fails in its learning, or things don't go as well as planned, and because there's not strong alignment, the effort gets the plug gets pulled on the effort. So there's an impatience for growth, and finally just competition from the core. So these are what we're trying to overcome as key challenges that we see over and over again in trying to drive breakthrough innovation with established organizations. And the answer around that is to, again, develop this longer term perspective with a powerful vision that's hopeful, that's inspiring, that's practical, and that has purpose behind it. And I would just say, especially in the times of crisis like COVID-19, for organizations, it's actually more important than ever that they have this North Star, this direction that gets past the 1 to 2 years of this crisis and starts to say, well, where do we ultimately want to be, that almost is independent of the rough waves and turbulence that we're going to face here for, the next number of months to up to 18 months to 2 years. That's the foundation of it. The other way to think about it is we need to look beyond the typical planning horizon, not only for the potential of, further out realizing our business could commoditize or just general core operations could slow down because of competition in other ways, but also we find the opportunity and the opportunity cost of not investing in something early enough is actually the higher reason to open up this longer term time horizon to be able to see what could be the art of possibility as trends converge, different technologies that come together. We found, unfortunately, as you see on the bottom, very few executives ever look greater than 8 years. Executive teams or companies look greater than 8 years out. And in fact, 75%, 80% of teams, leadership teams, are never looking past 5 years. So it's a problem, we believe, in just the viewpoint about the future and how to manage it. That brings me to the point about future back. So it's one thing to look in the future and to begin to envision something. It's another in how you go about doing it. If you just take the way things work today and you extrapolate, move that out to 10 years and just try to think, if you think too much with blinders on about your business model of today and how things work, and you're just trying to move that forward as an exercise, that's what we would call present forward, which again works for general operations, but in trying to imagine your future, will not allow you to break free enough to be transformative if you need to be. Part of the exercise. Sorry, someone else needs to go on mute.
Sushmita, can you please mute it? Thank you. Yep.
So this is a picture of an early locomotive train in the United States in the 1820s. So steam-powered locomotive technology came about. It was a technology that really could unlock a new future of transportation. The first response to that technology was to develop a train system that basically just used horse-drawn stagecoaches and put them behind them, to real peril of the people that rode in them. You could see the people on the top, they were given the cheaper seats, but yet they faced danger, smoke and soot, and even burning ashes. So this was an example of having the opportunity to do something transformative, but not thinking in a future back way, and not really thinking of the propellants of possibility that came with what the technology could enable. And of course, things did change, and passenger cars of trains looked a lot different ultimately, but it just proves the point that we oftentimes look to the future too much anchored on the present and the past, as opposed to opening up the mind to what is the art of the possibility. This is another example of Goodyear Tire Company that got into aerospace, and when it was asked for its first submission to what a satellite would look like, it very much looked like a inner tube tire as a tire company. Not that there wasn't some merit in the dimensions of this kind of approach, but it was clearly, again, being anchored in this present forward, too much of today, which would limit the art of the possibility of tomorrow. So we want to think in a future back way. And just to put it simple, future back
Mark,
contrasts
sorry to
present
interrupt.
forward. Yes?
The screen is not moving. The slide is not moving.
The slide is not moving.
No,
How is that?
Now it is moving.
Is it okay?
Yeah, it is okay.
Okay. So I'm on the slide that says attributes of present forward and attributes of future back thinking. The first step in developing this practical vision is the thinking. And then the process, of course, is literally putting yourself in the future and walking it back. So the thinking is for teams, not just innovation teams, but leadership teams, to talk about what could be as opposed to what is, to recognize that things may not be a straight line into the future, they may be discontinuous, that we might have to be dealing with this idea of being more ambiguous and abstract about the future and being okay about that. It's along the lines of design thinking, to be able to manage assumptions, not just facts, focusing on the questions more than the answers and sort of building off of this clean sheet. And it's more of a systemic approach. Again, I think the Apple example shows of thinking in a systems construct as a way to really, again, do something transformative or breakthrough. So that's the idea, is to be in a future back thinking kind of way. And with that kind of thinking, to be able to then develop a vision for the future. And we contrast that with strategy here to show, vision is a true vision in our terms is about making choices in the long term, more than 5 years out, versus strategy, which is actually more of the how to get it done. So it's choices you make in the next 1 to 3 years as stepping stones to get you to 5 years out. Vision allows you to define a new game to play, whereas strategy is really about how do you win an existing game or a defined game. Vision's about the destination, strategy is really about the journey. And vision has an important purpose, which it should inspire the organization. And again, I think inspiration comes more than just a simple vision statement, but actually a narrative that fully defines what not only the future holds, but what you look like, what as an organization in that future, in the sense of even a portfolio of businesses. Like, again, Apple had its core computer business, it had the digital hub in the future, and then it had this vision of actually creating its own consumer electronic devices, versus strategy, which is really about operationalizing and improving the ability to win the game. So I think the other important principle here is I think have to get to the next level of language, that what do we really mean by vision and what do we mean by strategy, and how do we, again, in a future back thinking kind of way, bring vision to life to help us to align and commit leadership teams and innovation teams for the long-term effort that oftentimes breakthrough growth takes to be able to go beyond the core business. Just on the application side, and I'll just say this briefly to open up for questions and answers, and you could read a lot more about this in the book. There is a very well-structured process so that being a practical visionary can be very accessible, that it's not just for the Steve Jobs and Jeff Bezos and other visionaries, even a Gandhi or a Mandela, from historical times and even outside of business. But there's actually a way to practically define it for organizations. And so the thinking is this first start. The process, which is this more iterative explore, envision, discover process, as opposed to a linear operate and execute process, is the foundational principle. It's a principle of learning. It's very much similar to an innovation process, sort of building a new business model, but it's applied to vision and strategy. And the steps really are pretty simple. I mean, almost deceptively simple, but in trying to make it happen, can be difficult if you don't really lay out the process in the right way and put the right commitment. The first major step is, of course, to develop your vision. The second step is to convert that to a strategy, basically how you're going to take that and operationalize it and walk it back to what are the seeds and the different things you need to plant today. And then the third is not just implementing, but also programming an approach to make that happen. And as I said, I won't have time to go into the details here. But again, I recommend reading the book because we walk through it very carefully, chapter by chapter, to not only give you the language, but to give you the very specifics of the process. The first part of the process I mentioned is to develop your vision. Again, I would just say in simple terms, it starts with painting a picture of that future environment that requires defining. And we've seen all the time with working with clients, spending a lot of time just deciding what's the right time horizon, one that is going to stretch your thinking and get you past the noise of the short term and midterm, but not too long term that it becomes utterly unrelatable. We want to try to not only, as bullet point 2, define the trends, but what is the implication of those trends really about? What does it mean for the consumer or customer 5 to 10 years out in terms of what they're really trying to get done as you think about the circumstance they're going to be in the future, and then building what we call view of the world statements that describe that. Then you move to the implications of the future. What does it mean for your business? And I'll show that next. And then finally, how do you envision literally your organization in terms of core, adjacent, and new growth? Again, adjacent really means leveraging the existing business model and operating model, and new growth means being open to develop new business models. That should be part of that should be aspirations and purpose, and then of course bringing that all together to be able to communicate it through what we call a strategic narrative. So that's the first phase, to develop your vision. As I mentioned, one of the examples on implications for the future that come from looking at the environment are these, what we call 4 major archetypes. One is that you realize that your core could really be disrupted, like Blockbuster and sort of rental videos did with Netflix, and that could lead to serious decline. If you look out in the future, that's one archetype. The other is moderate threats emerge. The core just slows, business slows, commoditization in different categories that's happened with fast-moving consumer goods like Procter & Gamble. Major opportunities ahead. Amazon has repeatedly anticipated well out opportunities and have been a serial business model innovator as a consequence. Jeff Bezos literally says that he has a competitive advantage by looking 7 years out, because there's very few other companies that are going to spend time. So it's a space that's less contested, as he puts it. And then, of course, maintaining the status quo. If you're a vaccine or therapy company like Moderna, focusing on the growth in the core is probably, what you'd realize about the future. But that, for us, has been mostly a very rare circumstance. Almost any company is facing one of the other 3 archetypes, and hence the reason why it's so important to be able to look in the future. The second step, again, I'm going to move fairly quickly, is to be able to convert vision to strategy. You need to think about what we call a future state portfolio that literally makes tangible, from a financial and an impact point of view, what are these different core and adjacent and new and different growth businesses that can achieve your aspiration. The new and different we call strategic opportunity areas. How do you walk the future back to be able to develop milestones, only they're done in reverse? And then that should lead you to be deciding what are the innovation investment portfolio that you have for the next year to 3 years to be able to work towards your intended vision. You've categorized these initiatives, core, adjacent, and new. You've tried to balance based on the different profiles of risk and growth. And most importantly, a lot of this helps to determine what you need to stop, what you need to slow down over the next few years because it's not going to be as relevant as your future, having gone through this exercise. And then I'm going to skip this for the sake of time, but the final point I would make is on phase 3, programming and implementing your strategy. We see so many companies that skip the programming and go right to the implementation. And that's a big problem, especially if you're trying to develop a host of breakthrough growth efforts. We need to think about how do we set the senior leadership team up to support these innovation teams that need to embark on new venture growth efforts. So it's this combination of setting the senior leadership team in the right way to govern and plan and manage between the core and new. The organizational model of the innovation teams needs to be set up with the right talent and screening of talent, the right allocation of time, that they're not splitting their time between the core and new, but they're dedicated to the new. And that the process, as we talked about, is an explore, envision, discover process more than it is a traditional stage gate product development or operate and execute process. And then finally, implementation is, especially in breakthrough growth, is being able to realize you have to follow these stages, just like business model development, and first incubate, have the patience to do that the right way, and have sufficient learning before you move to scale and acceleration and transition. So the last piece I'll share is just to say, we believe this is never a one and done. You can lay out a vision and you can walk that back to initiatives of today, but leadership teams need to keep revisiting the future on a periodic basis. The automotive manufacturer BMW in Germany, because of all the change they're facing in the industry, even before COVID, spends at least once a quarter for a day just talking about the future and the implications of the future and what insights they can pull out of that future to be able to decide changes they need to make today, adjustments in their initiatives, and even adjustments in their narrative of the future as the present, as walking toward the future, as reality comes into that narrative, things continually get evolved and shaped. So it's never a one and done. And what we wanted to just share here is one idea is that just like process can be really very well defined, say in an HR function or a marketing function, we think there could be more structure at a leadership team level that allows leaders to toggle between present forward and future back. As I mentioned before, present forward is going to be 80 to 90% of what leadership needs to do. But it would be helpful to make sure leadership knows what circumstance they're in. Are we in a present forward mode? And that's our focus is going to be near term and operations, and we're going to be much more analytical and data driven and financially driven? Or is this a time to be future back, where we want to be long term and we want to be very learning oriented and focus on exploration and envision and discovery, and recognize the process is going to be more messy and creative, more divergence before convergence, and decision making that's around building up on assumptions. So with that, I just close by thanking you, and I would entertain questions. I also just mentioned, for those that are interested, it's for free. You can go to harvardbusinesshbr.org, and we've written an article called "Leaders, Do You Have a Clear Vision for the Post-Crisis Future?" where these principles of future back have been applied to specifically how do you think about managing through the COVID crisis and beyond. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Rajaram, and to facilitate a Q&A session.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Mark, for a very insightful presentation. We have some real good questions which have come from the audience. So the key question here is, if you are the CEO, short-term delivery is important, while at the long-term you have to ensure that you are able to get the competitive advantage. How do we ensure that how much time do we spend, how much, how do we, performance measures, bonuses are all tied towards, the quarterly performances. Do you anticipate? Shashi Kumar is asking this question.
Oh, thank you, Shashimi Kumar. This is again why why we wanted to spend so much time focusing on a compelling, inspiring vision, because executive teams face so much pressure. Other people in the organization, we laid out three things. One is the pressure comes from cognitive biases to start with. We tend to be very much discount the future and prioritize today. They call it actually a term, hyperbolic discounting. We tend to be very focused on loss aversion. So, the idea that we don't really know how something's going to turn out is going to be deprioritized from today. We tend to be sort of bounded in the things we know, bounded rationality, they call it. So anyway, there's a set of biases that put us to the present, to the near term. And then to your point, added on top of that are rewards and incentives. Rewards and incentives make it even harder. And those rewards and incentives are not just with the company, but it's actually in the ecosystem, the stakeholders, the investors. So that makes it even further. And then I think finally, executives especially are so busy. They have so much on their plate that it crowds out the ability to really have the time to spend in the future. And so that's a tall order to try to change the pressures. So it takes a real leadership. There's only one way to say this is just leadership, to say the opportunity cost in this world of not thinking longer term in terms of, if I want to sustain my business and not just make it profitable, if I'm looking to sustainability and I want to be a good leader, a good steward, then I, with my team, he or she needs to decide, can I motivate people to a common goal and a purpose, to be very purpose driven? We find that many companies do this in successful transformation because they let purpose overcome all of the pressures of the here and now. So, companies like Tencent in China and Siemens that says its purpose is to serve society, they're making the change even in spite of all of this quarterly earnings pressure, this short-term pressure, and even on incentives, because of the ability to drive leadership through this development of a practical vision, a purpose-driven vision. And I think the final thing I would say about it is leadership just has to recognize it's not going to be probably more than 10% of their time, but they should carve out that time. And if they don't feel like they have that 10 to 20%, then they need to figure out how they can trust the next level of leadership to delegate. But it's important for the future to be able to recognize this opportunity cost of not spending time in developing these seeds for the future is actually worse than saying, well, we have to get all these things done because this is the way we're rewarded. It's going to, and the final thing I would say is the reason I say it this way is I don't think anytime soon rewards and incentive systems are going to change, where all of a sudden there's going to be a lot more rewards for the long term. So organizations have to create their future. There's a great quote that says futures can't be predicted, but they can be invented. And I think that's the decision that all leaders have to decide. Are they going to let the future happen to them, or are they going to invent it and propel it to greater heights?
Mark, a follow-on question. Are there any examples of organizations who have done some new kind of performance measure which automatically forces them to invest that 15-20% of time on the future, and the board and the entire senior management recognizing that and rewarding that?
I think that I don't know one. It's a great question, and I think it would be the next level is to simply make that as part of the performance management. I do think I mentioned BMW as an automotive manufacturer. I do believe the board, it's another thing I wrote about, is supportive of their determination to spend time in the future. I do think that there are a number of companies that have moved to say, longer term success around a greater part of our portfolio has to be about new product creation. It can't just be about delivery of existing product. It has to be true breakthrough, is a step in the right direction here. And I do think, one of the the case studies we wrote in the book is about Johnson and Johnson's disease interception World Without Disease program that gets past just making the pill, just being a break fix treatment. That group is clearly being rewarded in a different way to be able to motivate them, that they can manage for the longer term. So I do think that there is examples, whether it's really systemic and whether it's just sort of the natural way to think about things. I think it's absolutely the right way to go. But I think we're just at the beginning stage of 21st century management that you'll see more of this. I also think you'll see more of companies that are not only there to serve their shareholders, but to serve society. And that's changing as we speak. There's a group in the United States called the Business Roundtable, and they're absolutely focused on, like JP Morgan and J&J and IBM, they're all focused more on driving this purpose for society as much as the purpose for their shareholders.
Thank you, Mark. Shrikant Krishnamurthy has a question. How much design thinking can be leveraged in this future back mode?
I think a lot of it. I mean, I think there's a lot of overlap. I don't want to in any way suggest that this isn't built heavily. Knowledge is built on knowledge. It very much is design thinking orientation. It's right brain creative. It's being able to think in a architecture systemic kind of way. It's being able to get past even inductive logic. It's actually called the abductive logic of saying what could be as opposed to what is. Another way to look at it is it's taking design thinking that's been applied to innovation and innovation teams and bringing that in I think, a more targeted way to leadership teams. But it's absolutely very much congruent with design thinking. I think it can heavily be leveraged. I think there's some nuances and some adds that we have in sort of the way of sort of thinking in this future back-esque kind of systems way that are, I think, additive to that, but definitely foundational design thinking is part and parcel to this approach.
And Dr. T.V. Gopal from the academia is asking the question, are there any metrics in this whole exercise? Are there any lead indicators of organizations who are doing well, or are there lag indicators? Any metrics to track if somebody is doing it well and versus not going well and things like that?
Well, I think that again, it's in the early days, but I'd give a couple ways to address this question of metrics. One is, at least in terms of evidence for this working, we tried to build our evidence base not only on our own clients, but just external case studies and research. And, as I mentioned before, one piece of evidence of where this has been repeatable as a sort of a serial breakthrough growth innovator or serial business model innovator doing it over and over again is Amazon is absolutely top notch and continuing to repeatably create new business models, whether it's Amazon Web Services or the Kindle or what it's done with digital streaming, with entertainment. It's been a serial business model innovator. And that's been driven by a group that not only is great at execution, but thinks in this longer term future back way that can look out 7 years and really try to take advantage. That's what has enabled them to have the patience to be able to develop and incubate these new efforts. I think the other way to think about metrics in a more tactical way is the measurement is not about financials, at least initially. The measurement is about assumptions testing and proving or disproving assumptions, and it's the progress of assumptions testing that is what is the measurement of progress, in a program like this. So I think that's a second data point. The third is, I mentioned this Transformation 20 study that Insight did, where we found that the top 20 in successful transformational efforts came by being able to develop a very purpose-driven, if you will, vision to be able to drive those organizations to successful transformation.
Very good. Yeah, the other question from Sanjeev Kumar Saxena is asking, yeah, you talked about, vision, and you talked about not much mention about mission and the strategy. How are they linked? And
Yeah. So I would say that mission is very much what I call purpose. It's defining the mission is sort of where you sit on the map. Vision's where you want to go. So I think mission is very tightly aligned with purpose. I think purpose, though, takes it to perhaps the next level to say, to make sure that that mission, in and of itself creates inspiration. But essentially mission and purpose are one and the same thing: core mission, core purpose. In terms of strategy, as I mentioned, we think of vision as the destination, and strategy is how you get there. I noticed, by the way, there was a question around, this being in the COVID scenario. And I do think, again, read the article in Harvard Business Review. It's free. Anybody can get online and read it. But I think the difference is all of these trends have come much faster. Many of them have come much faster because of this crisis. And the other thing is the next 12 to 24 months are going to be, let's say the next 6 to 18 months are going to be very uncertain. And so we have to include scenario planning as part of how we think about strategy and getting to our ultimate destination. But we still need that vision, that destination to guide us through these turbulent times. But what we do over the next 12 to 24 or 36 months, we're going to have to be a lot more flexible and manage the uncertainty by being able to think about scenarios and implications of those scenarios. And that takes us a further step of how strategy is different than vision. That's very much about strategy versus vision being about the long term. What I want to try to encourage is getting away from vision and mission statements, which don't have enough soul to them to be able to inspire the organization and give it purpose and hope, and the direction that it needs in this practical sense that actually ends up making real resource allocation decisions today.
And Mr. Shivanantam is asking, what will be the role of digital platforms in this future back strategy?
That's a great question. I think, first of all, digital platforms, digital as a whole, is one of the sort of trends, if you will, that have been catalyzed by the crisis. I think that is only going to move some things faster. The way we always think about digital and digital transformation is making sure that we think of that as a means to an end. It's not an end in of itself. It's a technology enablement. And so the role of it, depends on first understanding what job is the customer trying to get done, and what does digital enable in terms of changing a business model or making it more capable of, say, lowering costs or improving productivity, or what is the purpose? So I think digital definitely has a role, and I also think it's what you would again use as an important underpinning of why you go in this exercise in the first place, so that you can clean sheet, if you will, zero-based budget, if you will, how digital would fit within an imagined future to serve a customer in a market as a potential sort of high-level business, and looking in that open way, as opposed to back to design thinking for strategy, as opposed to digital somehow fits within the existing paradigm, and that's what we start with. Because if you do it that way, then you end up with the train problem. You end up with horse-drawn carriages behind a locomotive, as opposed to having opened up the possibility for a new architecture. So digital is really an enablement. It's a core technology that enables a business model change. And the best way to do that is start with the customer and their job to be done, and the value proposition that you want to develop, of which digital helps enable that value proposition to be developed.
Yeah. Yeah, we have 4 minutes, Mark. I will ask the last question. Oh, yeah, one more question has come. Can we leverage the power of AI and ML, machine learning, in our visioning exercise? Is it only humans who play a role, or even computers have a role in determining your vision?
That's a really good question. I honestly hadn't thought about that before, so I don't know. I'd love to keep the dialogue going on that one. Um, you know, I think the question would be, how does AI or machine learning, how would it help with unstructured problem solving, right? Because this is not this is not rules based or algorithmic. It's very messy. So the extent that artificial intelligence, machine learning could kind of help in a visioning exercise in terms of being able to take and anticipate how trends can converge and that could lead to a different set of implications for an industry transformation. I mean, I guess that would be possible because, depending on how, I'm not enough of an expert on what AI can and can't do, but I think, to the extent that it has an ability to see patterns, process patterns, and be able to, and trends, and analyze the frequency of a potential disruption, it seems like it could be helpful as a tool. But the honest answer is I never really thought about that question. So
Yeah, maybe I can try to supplement.
sure.
Maybe it may help in creating more scenarios, because
Yeah.
potentially come up with a whole lot of combination scenarios which humans may not normally comprehend, right?
Mhm.
So that way it may add value in that sense. The question from Mahesh, the question from Apurva: under future back theory, is there always already a model which objectively takes into consideration the major predefined factors you mentioned: macroeconomics, business needs, technology?
Yes, I mean, I think that the exercise of envisioning the future really should take in, the, as much as it makes sense to be able to look into the future, and be able to bring about the right perspective of macroeconomic trends, um, and thoughts about the future and how supply demand could be. I mean, certainly, I think you have to make sure you don't get overly analytical, because what we're trying to achieve is as much art as science. It's about building clarity in a point of view that it's assumptions driven versus certainty. And I think we could go too far on the disciplines of macroeconomic and everything, which tend to have more predictive power to them, or more sort of grounded in the basis of analysis and data than what we're prescribing here. I mean, the other way I look at it is like Porter's 5 forces in terms of a much more grounded strategy. 10 is, I think, a more static model. This is more of a dynamic model, if you will. It's more of a unfolding and shaping process, because we're really trying to anticipate how things are shifting in time. So I think various disciplines in management can be applied. We just have to be careful that they're applied in the right way, because this is as much about I mean, there's no better way to say it, is much about sort of driving almost an intuition, as because the good news is you don't have to make a one and done decision. You're bringing that back to a set of experiments today, of which you're driving ongoing learning. So we don't want to put too much anchor on that future vision. We need to understand what it's tended to do. It's not intended to give us certainty. It's not intended to give us one and done decisions. It's intended to give us direction, and it's intended to better inform what we should be investing in today for the future, but not making one and done big bets about it. We have to manage that evolution the right way.
Thank you very much for taking the time off for
Thank you.
Chennai. I would like everyone to join me in giving a big hand to Mark.